The rain began to fall just as Emma closed the last chapter of her book. The gentle patter against the window pane a soothing backdrop to the quiet evening she had planned. She stretched, feeling the tension release from her shoulders, and glanced around her cozy living room. The soft glow of the table lamp cast warm, inviting shadows across the walls, and the aroma of the herbal tea she had brewed earlier still lingered in the air. Emma lived alone in a quaint cottage on the outskirts of town, nestled at the edge of a dense forest. It was a charming place, with ivy crawling up the stone walls and a garden she meticulously tended. The solitude suited her, offering a retreat from the chaos of her job in the city. Tonight, however, an inexplicable unease settled over her as the rain intensified, drumming insistently on the roof. She rose from the couch and walked over to the window, peering out into the dark, rain-soaked night. The forest was an impenetrable blackness, the occasional flash of lightning illuminating the twisted branches that seemed to reach out like skeletal fingers. A shiver ran down her spine, and she pulled the curtain shut, trying to shake off the sense of foreboding. Emma decided to distract herself with a movie, something lighthearted to dispel the creeping dread. As she searched for the remote, a sudden knock on the door made her jump. She stood still, heart pounding, straining to hear over the rain. The knock came again, louder this time, echoing through the small cottage. "Who could that be?" she muttered, glancing at the clock. It was nearly midnight, far too late for visitors. Reluctantly, she made her way to the door, her mind racing with possibilities. Perhaps it was a neighbor in trouble, or someone stranded in the storm. Taking a deep breath, Emma unlocked the door and opened it a crack. The porch light flickered as if struggling to stay lit, casting a dim glow on the figure standing outside. It was a man, drenched from head to toe, his face obscured by the hood of his raincoat. "Can I help you?" Emma called out, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'm sorry to bother you," the man replied, his voice muffled by the rain. "My car broke down a little way up the road. I was hoping I could use your phone to call for assistance." Emma hesitated, her mind flashing through the warnings she had heard about strangers. But the man sounded genuinely distressed, and the rain was relentless. She couldn't leave him out there. "All right, come in," she said, opening the door wider. The man stepped inside, water pooling on the hardwood floor beneath him. He pushed back his hood, revealing a gaunt face with piercing blue eyes. He looked around the cozy living room, his gaze lingering on the fireplace where a small fire crackled. "Thank you," he said, offering a grateful smile. "I'm David, by the way." "Emma," she replied, returning the smile. "The phone's in the kitchen. Follow me." She led him through the narrow hallway, trying to ignore the nagging voice in her head that questioned her decision. David used the phone quickly, his conversation brief and to the point. He hung up and turned to Emma. "They'll be here in about an hour," he said. "Thank you again for your kindness. Would it be all right if I waited here until they arrive?" "Of course," Emma replied, though she felt a twinge of discomfort. "Would you like some tea? I just made a pot." "That would be lovely," David said, his eyes softening with warmth. As Emma prepared the tea, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. There was a strange energy in the air, an undercurrent of tension that seemed to grow with each passing minute. She handed David a steaming cup and sat down opposite him, trying to keep the conversation light. "So, what were you doing out here so late?" she asked. "I'm a photographer," David explained. "I was hoping to capture some shots of the storm over the forest. I guess I got a bit carried away and didn't realize how late it was." Emma nodded, though she found it odd that someone would be out in this weather for photographs. The rain was now coming down in sheets, rattling the windows and obscuring the view outside. The power flickered, making the lights dim and then brighten again, casting eerie shadows around the room. David seemed unfazed by the storm, sipping his tea calmly. His presence, however, began to feel increasingly intrusive to Emma. She couldn't pinpoint why, but a deep-seated instinct told her something was wrong. The phone rang, startling both of them. Emma hurried to answer it, her heart racing. It was the tow company, informing her that they were delayed due to the weather but would arrive as soon as possible. She relayed the information to David, who took it in stride. "It's no trouble," he said. I appreciate your hospitality. Emma forced a smile and glanced at the clock. The minutes seemed to drag, each one amplifying her anxiety. She excused herself to use the bathroom, needing a moment to gather her thoughts. As she washed her hands, she caught a glimpse of her reflection in the mirror. Her eyes were wide with fear, her face pale. She took a deep breath, trying to calm herself. When she returned to the living room, David was standing by the window, staring out into the storm. He turned when he heard her, his expression unreadable. "I was just admiring your garden," he said. "It's quite beautiful, even in this weather." "Thank you," Emma replied, feeling a surge of pride despite her unease. "Gardening is a passion of mine." David smiled, but there was something in his eyes that made Emma's skin crawl. She decided it was time to be more direct. "David, I have to be honest," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I'm feeling a bit uncomfortable. I don't usually have strangers in my home, and with the storm and everything." David's smile faded, replaced by a look of genuine concern. "I understand," he said. "I didn't mean to impose. I'll wait outside if it makes you feel better." "No, you don't have to do that," Emma said quickly, feeling a pang of guilt. I don't know. It's been a strange night." David nodded, his expression softening. "It's all right, Emma. I appreciate your honesty. I'll sit here quietly until the tow truck arrives." Emma nodded, feeling a bit reassured. She sat down on the couch, trying to focus on the fire rather than the storm raging outside. The minutes ticked by in silence, broken only by the occasional crackle of the fire and the relentless pounding of the rain. Then, there was a loud crash from the kitchen, followed by the sound of glass shattering. Emma jumped up, her heart racing. David was on his feet instantly, his eyes sharp with alertness. "Stay here," he said firmly, moving towards the kitchen. Emma wanted to protest, but fear held her back. She stood frozen, listening as David moved through the house. Moments later, he returned, a frown etched on his face. "A branch broke through the window," he said. "I've covered it with a towel for now, but you'll need to get it fixed soon." Emma nodded, feeling a mix of relief and embarrassment. "Thank you," she said. "I'm sorry, this night has just been—" "Don't worry about it," David interrupted gently. "It's been a rough night for both of us." They sat back down, the silence between them now filled with an uneasy truce. Emma's nerves were frayed, every noise making her jump. She wished the tow truck would arrive already, but the storm showed no signs of letting up. As the night dragged on, Emma's exhaustion began to catch up with her. She fought to stay awake, her eyes drooping. David seemed to notice and stood up. "You should get some rest," he said. "I can keep watch until the tow truck arrives." Emma wanted to argue, but the weight of sleep was too much. She nodded, too tired to care anymore. "All right," she said. "Thank you, David." He smiled, and for the first time, Emma felt a genuine warmth from him. She made her way to her bedroom, leaving the door slightly ajar. She collapsed onto the bed, the events of the night swirling in her mind. Despite her fear, exhaustion took over, and she drifted off to sleep. Sometime later, Emma was jolted awake by a loud noise. She sat up, disoriented, her heart pounding. The house was dark, the power having gone out. She fumbled for her flashlight, the beam cutting through the darkness as she made her way to the living room. David was nowhere to be seen. Panic surged through her as she searched the house, calling his name. There was no response. She checked the kitchen, the bathroom, even the basement, but David had vanished. The front door was locked, the windows all intact except for the one in the kitchen. Emma's mind raced with possibilities. Had he left when the tow truck arrived? But why hadn't he woken her? She checked the phone, but the line was dead. She was completely alone, trapped in the darkness with no way to call for help. The storm raged on outside, the wind howling like a banshee. Emma felt a chill run down her spine as she realized she was truly isolated. She tried to stay calm, telling herself that David must have left for some reason. Maybe he didn't want to wake her and planned to come back in the morning. But deep down, she knew something was wrong. She sat on the couch, clutching the flashlight, her mind racing. The shadows seemed to move, taking on sinister shapes. Every creak of the house, every rustle of the wind, set her nerves on edge. She felt as if she was being watched, an unseen presence lurking just beyond the beam of light. Suddenly, there was a loud thud from upstairs. Emma froze, her blood running cold. She listened, straining to hear over the storm. The thud came again, followed by the sound of footsteps. Someone was in the house. Emma's heart pounded in her chest as she crept towards the stairs, the flashlight trembling in her hand. She peered up into the darkness, trying to see who or what was there. The footsteps grew louder, descending the stairs slowly, deliberately. "David," she called out, her voice shaking. There was no response. The footsteps continued, coming closer. Emma backed away, her mind screaming at her to run, but her legs felt like lead. The figure emerged from the shadows, and Emma's flashlight fell to the floor with a clatter. It was David, but his face was twisted into a grotesque mask of rage. His eyes, once warm and friendly, were now cold and menacing. He moved towards her with a slow, deliberate pace, a cruel smile playing on his lips. "David, what's going on?" Emma cried, her voice barely a whisper. "You shouldn't have let me in, Emma," he said, his voice low and menacing. "You shouldn't have let me in." Emma stumbled backwards, her mind racing for a way out. She turned and ran towards the kitchen, but David was faster. He grabbed her arm, his grip like iron, and pulled her back. "You're not going anywhere," he snarled. "You're mine now." Emma struggled, her fear giving her strength, but David was too strong. He dragged her towards the basement door, his eyes filled with a manic gleam. Emma's mind reeled with terror as she realized his true intentions. "No!" she screamed, fighting with all her might. "Let me go." David laughed, a chilling sound that echoed through the house. He threw open the basement door and dragged her down the stairs, her screams drowned out by the storm. Emma's flashlight lay forgotten on the floor, its beam casting eerie shadows on the walls. In the basement, David tied her to a chair, his movements quick and efficient. Emma's mind raced, trying to think of a way to escape, but fear clouded her thoughts. David stood back, admiring his work, his eyes gleaming with satisfaction. "This is where you belong," he said, his voice filled with a twisted pleasure. "With me, forever." Emma's heart pounded in her chest as she struggled against the ropes. She had to find a way out, had to escape this nightmare. She scanned the room, looking for anything that could help her, but it was bare, the walls closing in on her. David turned and walked up the stairs, leaving her alone in the darkness. Emma's mind raced with fear and desperation. She had to find a way out, had to escape before it was too late. She struggled against the ropes, her wrists burning as she pulled and twisted. She had to stay calm, had to think clearly. She took a deep breath, focusing on the task at hand. She felt the ropes begin to give, the knots loosening slightly. With renewed determination, Emma pulled harder, the ropes cutting into her skin. She gritted her teeth against the pain, her mind focused on one thing: survival. She felt the ropes loosen further, giving her a glimmer of hope. Finally, the ropes fell away, and Emma was free. She rubbed her wrists, trying to get feeling back into her hands, and stood up slowly, her legs shaking. She had to move quickly, had to find a way out before David returned. She crept up the stairs, her heart pounding in her chest. The house was dark and silent, the storm raging outside. She had to be quiet, had to avoid alerting David to her escape. She reached the top of the stairs and peered out into the hallway, her eyes scanning for any sign of him. The house was empty, the shadows still and silent. Emma moved quickly, making her way towards the front door. She had to get out, had to find help. She reached the door and unlocked it, her hands trembling with fear and adrenaline. As she stepped outside, the storm hit her full force, the rain and wind battering her. She ran towards the road, her mind focused on one thing: getting as far away as possible. She didn't look back, didn't stop until she reached the safety of a neighbor's house. Emma pounded on the door, her heart racing with fear. The door opened, and a kind-faced woman peered out, her eyes widening in shock. "Please, help me," Emma gasped, her voice barely a whisper. The woman pulled her inside, closing the door against the storm. Emma collapsed on the floor, her body shaking with relief and exhaustion. She was safe, for now. The police arrived soon after, their lights flashing in the darkness. Emma told them everything, her voice trembling with fear and relief. They searched the house, but David was gone, leaving behind only the shattered remnants of Emma's peaceful life. Days turned into weeks, and Emma struggled to rebuild her life. The memories of that night haunted her, the fear and terror never far from her mind. She moved to a new house, far from the forest, hoping to escape the nightmares that plagued her. But even in the safety of her new home, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that David was still out there, watching and waiting. The rain, once a soothing presence, now filled her with dread. She lived in fear, always looking over her shoulder, knowing that the nightmare was far from over. And somewhere, in the darkness, David watched and waited, his eyes filled with a twisted satisfaction. He had found his prey, and he would never let her go. Emma's story became a cautionary tale, a reminder of the dangers that lurk in the shadows. She lived in constant fear, the rain and darkness a constant reminder of the night her life changed forever. And though she tried to move on, to find peace, the terror was always there, lurking just beneath the surface, waiting for the next rainy night. But life had to go on. Emma resumed her job, though she had requested a transfer to a different office, far from her old home. She made new friends, trying to surround herself with people who could bring some light into her darkened world. Yet, despite her efforts, the fear lingered, a constant companion. One evening, as the sun set and the shadows grew long, Emma decided to visit a therapist. Dr. Green was recommended by a colleague, and though Emma was skeptical, she knew she needed help to move past her trauma. Dr. Green's office was a warm, inviting space filled with plants and soft lighting. Emma felt a sense of calm as she sat down, the doctor's kind eyes watching her with understanding. "Tell me what's been bothering you, Emma," Dr. Green said gently. Emma took a deep breath, recounting the events of that fateful night. She spoke of David, the storm, and the terror that had gripped her. Dr. Green listened patiently, nodding occasionally, her presence comforting. "You've been through a traumatic experience," Dr. Green said when Emma finished. "It's natural to feel fear and anxiety. But you must remember, you're safe now. You survived." Emma nodded, though the words felt hollow. "I just can't shake the feeling that he's still out there, watching me. Every time it rains, I'm terrified he'll come back." Dr. Green leaned forward, her expression serious. "Fear can be powerful, Emma. It can take over our lives if we let it. But you have the strength to overcome it. You're here, talking to me, seeking help. That's the first step." Emma left the session feeling a glimmer of hope. She continued to see Dr. Green regularly, each session chipping away at the walls of fear that had built up around her. Slowly, she began to reclaim her life, finding moments of joy and peace. One evening, months later, Emma was sitting on her porch, sipping a cup of tea. The sky was clear, the stars twinkling above. She felt a sense of peace, a feeling she hadn't experienced in a long time. She smiled, thinking of how far she had come. But just as she was about to go inside, she felt a presence. Her heart skipped a beat as she turned, her eyes scanning the darkness. The shadows seemed to shift, taking on a familiar, menacing shape. "Hello, Emma," a voice whispered from the darkness. Emma's blood ran cold. It was David, his eyes gleaming with a malevolent light. He stepped out of the shadows, his smile twisted and cruel. "You didn't think you could escape me, did you?" he said, his voice low and taunting. Emma backed away, her mind racing. She had to stay calm, had to think clearly. She glanced towards the door, calculating her chances of making it inside before he could reach her. David moved closer, his eyes never leaving hers. "I told you you're mine. You'll always be mine." Emma's fear threatened to overwhelm her, but she fought it back. She had survived before, and she would survive again. She took a deep breath, summoning all her strength. "No," she said firmly, her voice steady. "I'm not yours. I'm not afraid of you anymore." David's smile faltered, his eyes narrowing. "We'll see about that." Emma turned and ran, her heart pounding in her chest. She reached the door and slammed it shut, locking it behind her. She grabbed her phone, dialing 911 with trembling fingers. "He's here," she said, her voice shaking. "He's at my house." The operator assured her that help was on the way, but the minutes felt like hours. Emma stayed by the door, her eyes fixed on the shadowy figure outside. David paced back and forth, his expression one of fury and frustration. When the police arrived, David was gone. They searched the area but found no trace of him. Emma felt a mix of relief and dread, knowing that he could return at any time. But she refused to let fear control her life. She installed security cameras, reinforced her doors and windows, and took self-defense classes. She was determined to protect herself, to live without the constant shadow of fear. Emma's strength and resilience became an inspiration to those around her. She spoke openly about her experience, helping others who had faced similar fears. She found a new purpose in helping others, turning her trauma into a source of strength. Years passed, and Emma continued to live her life, always vigilant but no longer paralyzed by fear. She found happiness again, surrounded by friends and loved ones. The rain still brought a twinge of unease, but she faced it with courage, knowing that she was stronger than her fears. And though David's shadow still loomed in the background of her mind, Emma knew that she had the power to overcome it. She had faced the darkness and survived, emerging stronger and more resilient. Emma's story became a testament to the strength of the human spirit, a reminder that even in the face of unimaginable fear, there is always hope. She lived each day with courage and determination, never letting the shadows of the past define her future. And somewhere, in the darkness, David watched and waited, his eyes filled with a twisted satisfaction. He had found his prey, but he would never break her spirit. Emma was a survivor, and no amount of darkness could ever dim her light.